Why? Because Jesus is telling us, I want you to find the most degenerate places and deeply disturbing spaces, and I want you to carry my aroma there. I want you to build my church there. Well, over 6 months ago, it's probably 8 months ago, I met with our entire staff during our staff meeting one Wednesday morning, and together we brainstormed what would become this series. The series we've entitled Aroma. I mean, we put a lot of work into what would each weekend, what would be included? What should we focus on? And since we began as a team effort and putting it together, I wanted it to be delivered as a team effort, which is why you've heard from some other voices here from our staff over the past couple weeks. And I gotta tell you, they did an amazing job. So can we thank them for their leadership? Just wonderful, so thankful. As we begin today, our time together, I'd like each one of you, if you're online or here in this place, to just close your eyes. Close your eyes, please. I'd like you to imagine that you're present at the cross a few moments before Jesus died. Now look up to the cross where Jesus is struggling for his last breath. Can you see him? Now look around you to the crowds who are mocking and jeering him. Now look at the Roman soldiers standing defiantly as they intimidate even the casual bystander. And now look around at the city as you take in all the power that Rome has amassed. Now imagine most of the disciples all hiding with the women, all frightened, feeling desperately alone. If you were to guess what group would still be around 500 years later, 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later, what group would win? The Romans or the disciples of Jesus? After all, I ask because our current culture believes that to have influence over others, you must first hold power over others. Now open your eyes. On that dark Friday afternoon in AD 33, Christianity appeared to be just another failed movement. Well, it first captured the hearts of so many people, it seemed to quickly collapse the very moment its leader died. And while many had originally followed Jesus, now only 11 men were left, as well as a few faithful women. The Romans, well, they consisted of hundreds of thousands, even millions. And then came Sunday. On that Sunday morning, a few of those faithful women visited the tomb and they found it empty. They quickly turned around and ran to tell the disciples that Jesus was alive. But did they believe it? Were their hearts immediately filled with power and purpose? Not really. In reality, they were incredibly conflicted. But once they saw Jesus with their own eyes, what seemed only as a failed movement quickly became a movement that couldn't be stopped. Hundreds and then thousands passionately joined this movement as the gospel spread like wildfire. It first spread throughout Rome and eventually to other regions in the world as well. And yet this caused those first Christians to experience fire. Not the kind of fire that ignites you and inspires you, but the kind of fire which slowly and painfully kills you. Under the Roman Emperor Nero, the persecution of Christians became so incredibly popular, often witnessed by the masses. After all, and I quote, this new and mischievous superstition, as the Roman historian Suetonius described them, were not only viewed as outcasts, but as rebellious believers who refused to worship their many esteemed Roman gods. To the Romans, this made Christians guilty of odium generis humani, hatred of the human race. In the mind of any good Roman, if Christians really loved humanity, then they would appease their many Roman gods since they ruled over the human race. So eventually the Romans created a name for this band of believers who faithfully followed this man named Jesus Christ. And it's not what you think. Well, we think of them as Christians or Christ followers. The Romans referred to them back then as atheists. That's right. They were atheists because they rejected their many Roman gods. And that's why Nero rejoiced in the persecution of Christians. He burned them alive, feed them to wild animals. And yet while there was a stench of Christian death in the air, there was also a scent of something else. You might call it a sweet fragrance which emanated from their very lives. And as more and more people continued to join this Christian movement, this transformational fragrance continued to spread all the more. For we are the aroma of Christ to God among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. And as one life touched another, and the power of the gospel spread still to another, the aroma of Christ became more and more evident in this world. In fact, due to this aroma, there were almost 34 million Christians around the world by 350 AD. And what caused it to spread so much? How would cause the aroma to spread and then be embraced by so many? Compassion. Compassion. You see, every Roman family was taught to care only for their own. They were schooled to be generous to both family members and Romans alike. And even so, they often failed in their attempts because they were more focused on themselves and gaining more power for themselves. Christians, well, they were radically different. These treasonous people, earlier deemed haters of the human race, cared compassionately for others. It mattered not to them if that other person was poor, what caste they were a part of, or to what creed they ascribed. If they were in need, they would experience the hand of Christ, also known as the aroma of Jesus Christ. For these Christians never wanted to hear Jesus say to them that I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They knew that when they looked in the eyes of another person, to serve them was to serve Jesus Christ. And since they knew that every person they encountered was made in the image of God and valued by God, the aroma of Christ kept spreading and it kept advancing. In light of this, how could God use you? How could God use you? Friends, back in those days, slavery was very common. Although it was a different form of slavery than what became horribly commonplace right here in America, slaves back then still had little value or worth. In Roman law, a slave was considered as one not having a face. Not having a face. And sadly, almost anyone could become a slave. If you took on more debt than you were able to later handle and repay, slavery became your present and your future. It's why Paul warned Christians when he said, you were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. And yet if someone did, if someone was forced into slavery and tragically became a person without a face, there was a place they could go to experience grace. For wherever God's people would gather, even a Christian considered rich and powerful would humbly take their knee as they took up the basin and towel. And in the midst of that Christian community, the feet of that slave would be washed and the face of that slave would be seen. So how could God use you? How could God use you to touch the life of another? Christians back then continued to display such compassion because they knew that due to Christ's work on the cross, there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Yes, the aroma of Christ was spreading, the more the humility of Christ was embraced. As Paul told them, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And as those Christians humbled themselves in the manner in which Christ humbled himself, Christians daily place the needs of others before their own. For greater love has no one than this, than he laid down his life for his friends. And that's why the Christian leaders who gathered in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea decreed that wherever a future church would be built, think about this, there must also be a place to care for those in need. John Ortberg writes, someone who's impacted me in this whole series, "This is why even today many hospitals have names such as Good Samaritan or Good Shepherd or Saint Anthony. Consequently, more and more people continue to join this revolutionary movement. The aroma of Christ was spreading everywhere. As one highly noted philosopher said, if you ask what is Jesus' influence on medicine and compassion, I would suggest that wherever you have an institution of self-giving for the lonely, schools, hospitals, hospices, and orphanages for those who will never be able to repay, this probably had its roots in the movement of Jesus." So as Christ's aroma spread throughout Rome, and the Christian faith became more accepted than refuted, one Roman emperor became increasingly frustrated, infuriated. His name was Julian. As the emperor, Julian's goal was to revive paganism in the recently Christianized Roman Empire. And yet in his desire to get his Roman citizens to become more pagan, he knew that he first needed to win their favor to get them on his side. To do that, he soon believed that for Rome to eventually become more pagan, they first needed to become more Christian. He wrote these words, "We ought then to share our money with all people, but more generously with the good, and with the helpless and the poor, so as to suffice for their need. And I will assert, even though it be paradoxical to say so, that it would be a pious act to share our clothes and food, even with the wicked. For it is to the humanity in a person that we give, and not to their moral character. Hence, I think that even those who are shut up in prison have a right to the same sort of care, since this kind of philanthropy will not hinder justice. For it is disgraceful that, when no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans, Christians, support not only their own poor, but ours as well, that all men see our people lack aid from us." What Julian didn't realize is that one can't manufacture the aroma of Christ. One must first know Christ to spread the aroma of his gospel. And the aroma of his gospel can only be propelled by true love. For if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But Julian didn't realize that to spread this kind of love, one must first know the author of love. It's why Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." You see, as a rabbi, Christ's teachings impacted all three, the heart, the soul, and the mind. Yet to impact one's heart and soul, every rabbi back then knew that you first had to capture one's mind. And that's why, while Jesus is certainly known for his love, for his compassion, his healing, and for his service, he is best known today for what he taught. But he taught not merely for comprehension. Jesus taught so that one's understanding could be conveyed through true action. As his own brother would later write, "Be doers of the word and not hearers only." So if one is to spread the aroma of Christ, one must first share what Christ taught. And this is why learning became an act of worship for every Christian back then. For the more we learn about God, the more we know about God, the more we can love God. With this in mind, it shouldn't surprise us that one of the first schools later established in Paris became well known as Oxford. Its motto, "The Lord is my light." And what happened next? Then came universities in Rome, Naples, Vienna, and Heidelberg. These were all begun by followers of Jesus so people could love God with their minds. They became to be called universities because they reflected the idea that in the beginning, God created things. And those who taught in universities eventually were known as professors, since they were thought to have truth which they professed. Friends, the aroma of Christ was spreading everywhere. So how could God use you? How could God use you? One person who caught the scent of that aroma and later then wanted to spread that aroma to others was a man named Robert Rakes. You ever heard of him? If not, you certainly know the result of the aroma that spread throughout his life. You do. Back in his day, Robert witnessed the poverty that was destroying little children in England. Those children were forced to work 6 days a week. But one day it dawned on Robert that Sunday was their free day. So he told his friend, I'm going to start a school for free to teach them to read and write and learn about God. In 1780, Robert put his words into action and formed what is now commonly known today as Sunday school. Think about this. Within 50 years, there were 1.5 million children being taught by 160,000 volunteer teachers who had embraced a vision to change the world for the Lord. Friends, how could God use you? How could God use you? Because the aroma back then was spreading everywhere. As Robert so well knew, he said, train a child in the way he or she should go. And when they are old, they will not depart from it. And that's why as time marched on, think about this, 92%, hold on to that number, 92% of the first 138 colleges and universities which were founded right here in America were founded by followers of Jesus Christ. And this holds true because those first followers of Christ clearly understood and shared the aroma of Christ with their own culture in ways that revolutionized their culture. So where do we start? How could God use you? How could God use you? How could God use all of us to change our culture with the aroma of Christ's gospel? Well, I believe the answer can be found within a certain lesson that Christ gave to his own disciples. It was on this occasion when Jesus took them to a stench-filled place. This place was well known to all the Jews of that time as the place that you didn't want to go. It was a place that no good Jew would ever go due to the vile things that happened there. And yet Jesus took them to this stench-filled place to help them see how the aroma of his gospel can spread from places just like this. The place, Caesarea Philippi. For the Romans, it was a very esteemed and beautiful place. You see, after all, it was filled with plant life and a few beautiful waterfalls. Yet it was within this beautiful place where rampant sexual sin was committed on a daily basis. In fact, there are things that happen there, friends, I cannot even mention to you. It's so out there. But it's important to understand that Caesarea Philippi was also referred to as the Rock of the Gods. The Rock of the Gods. Now, if you look a little bit distant there, you're gonna see, and you see it right now, it looks to be the entrance of a cave. That entrance was commonly known to the Jews back then as the gates of Hades. You might know them better as the gates of hell. So Jesus took them there, to the gates of hell. And in this forbidden setting, Jesus asked them a question. Who do people say I am? I'm sure the disciples were both surprised that Jesus took them there and surprised that he would ask such a question. But they gave it their best shot. They replied, well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? He said. Who do you say that I am? You see, now the pressure was really on because Jesus was basically telling them, I do not care what your friends think. I don't care what your culture thinks. Right now, I only care what you think. So who am I? Friend, who is Jesus to you? Is he who you want him to be? Is he who your friends say that he is? Or is it who he really is? If we're gonna spread the aroma of his gospel, we need to do so from knowing the real Jesus. So Jesus took them there and he said, who am I really? Suddenly Peter blurted out, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I want you to imagine the look on the other disciples' faces. I mean, were they glad that Peter said this? Were they jealous that Peter said this? Were they frustrated that Peter said this? Because he always seemed to speak first and then think later. whatever their feelings, Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Oh, you could have heard a pin drop. A pin drop. As the disciples began to take in and capture the significance of that moment. But Jesus wasn't done. He looked even deeper into Peter's eyes and he said, "I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it." Well, now Jesus really had their attention. Yet what did he mean by what he said about that rock? Well, later Catholics would say that Christ's statement meant that he was going to build his church on Peter, which is why they view him as their first pope. Later Protestants would say that Christ's statement meant that he was going to build his church on Peter's profession. Friends, I think something very different was actually going on. Peter had something to do with this, most certainly. His profession was certainly important in all of this. Yet Jesus was pointing them to something deeper when he said, "Upon this rock." Remember, they were visiting the place commonly known as the Rock of the Gods. And this was a stench-filled place. So Jesus was basically saying, I want you to take the aroma of my gospel to stench-filled places just like this. And yes, just like here, those places will look like you're at the gates of hell. And I want you to carry my aroma to the degenerate places, to the vile places, to the places my name is used, abused, and not known at all. And that's where I want you to tell them that I am their hope, I am their salvation, I am their life, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Friends, what does that mean for us? It means that we're to go out from these church walls and carry the aroma of Christ to the sex trafficking places, to the drug dealing spaces, to the crack houses in Cincinnati and the houses in our own neighborhoods. We're to take the aroma of Christ to our work settings, our play settings, our vacation settings, our restaurant settings, our sports settings, and always to our most uncomfortable settings. Why? Because Jesus is telling us, I want you to find the most degenerate places and deeply disturbing spaces, and I want you to carry my aroma there. I want you to build my church there. Why? Because you are the aroma of Christ to God among those who are being saved and those who are perishing, friends. So spread the aroma of Christ to places you don't naturally want to go, and spread the aroma of Christ to places you often frequent. And wherever you go in the name of the Father. Go in the name of the Son. Go in the name of the Holy Spirit as you build your lives upon Him.